Have you ever had an album hit you so hard, square in the chest, that it was almost like the songwriter knew something about your life in that moment that you weren't even ready to admit to yourself? Because that's the kind of art that we're talking about today on Astro Weirdos. Welcome back. I'm your fearless host, Alexandra Blair of Nine Lives Astrology. And here on this show, we talk to genuinely strange, brilliant, thorough little weirdos who are using astrology in novel ways, not vague, new agey stuff, not horoscopes, but genuinely offbeat applications of the celestial arts. My guest today is none other than my producer, Liz Manuell. Now, Liz and I talk once a week to talk about the show. This started as a casual off-camera exploration of some of my iconic depressive spirals and the albums that really dug me out of them. We ended up casting natal charts for the albums and then comparing our synastry with those albums and then comparing the transits that were happening at the time that we discovered the music as well, just to see all of the fabulous and freaky ways that these interlocking pieces come together. Once again, this episode is sponsored by Astrotheoros. If you are looking for an astrology software that doesn't cost $400 and doesn't look like Maggie from the DMV flipped her computer screen around for you to click-clack on, no offense, people named Maggie, Astrotheoros is your man. You can use it to track transits, animate charts, look at synastry, do secondary progressions, solar return charts, and you can save everyone you've ever known's information in there. One time when I was in the throes of postpartum depression, which we're going to be talking about today, my mom thought she was helping me out. She hired somebody to come clean my apartment. Would you believe I cast that man his chart? It's still in my software to this very day. You can be like me and be an astro hoarder with Astrotheoros. And if you want to learn how to do chart stalking yourself, like we're doing in today's episode, I am going to be teaching a workshop all about transit tracking, cut down on the astro anxiety, learn which transits to actually focus on. That's on November 5th. It's $44. It's a 2-hour webinar, and I will send you the recording. So check out the link in the description. All right, babies, let's get weird with it. All right, Liz, welcome to this side of the camera. Welcome to Astro Weirdos.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for having me. This is an incredible experience. I'm so excited to dive into all of the music that has changed our lives.
Seriously, I'm really excited about this. Liz and I have been talking about this episode for literally months. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the art that has really spoken to us in really our darkest times in life. We're
Yeah.
getting ready to talk about some dark shit
Yep.
right here. We are going to look back at one of the most significant albums of my life, which is Beach House's Teen Dream. And this album really came to me at a time in my life, which we have up on the screen. This was a time period when I was really, really low. I grew up in San Diego, but I got away from there the minute that I could. I just wanted to be anywhere else. I didn't like San Diego. I thought it was just for like chillers and surfers and losers. Now I realize those people knew what was important in life, and I was a little rising hustler. I was like, I need to get to a big city and perform, and
Yep.
I need to accomplish value by demonstrating it through my accomplishments. I was back home during this time period, and it was just like a depressor all around. Like, I was taking care of my dad. He had been diagnosed with primary progressive MS, which I think is pretty appropriate for a sixth house sun and those eclipses that were happening around that sixth house sun, the
Yeah.
trine from Saturn, bringing me back home. That Saturn in my 10th like really brought me back home. It made me appear like the kind of person I did not want to be, which was a hometown hero, like a person trapped in my house. And I was living in my childhood home. My boyfriend at the time had come with me, and that was really frustrating, frankly, because neither my dad nor my boyfriend were working. And I was working multiple jobs to support all of us. It was just a very dark and stressful time. My dad was also not doing well with
Mm.
this diagnosis. He probably should have been on some strong antidepressants, but neither of us were at that time. So it was just a really dark situation. And I had at the time dismissed my boyfriend. I was like, just please go home. We'll see if we can be together later, but I
Yeah.
just can't manage you as well as me at this time. I was really going through this through all of 2012, and I was moving through a ninth to a 10th house perfection year. I had Saturn in my 10th house, and then I moved into an 11th house perfection year with Saturn in my 11th house of Scorpio. So really all through 2012, 2013, I was going through this really challenging time. You can also see that there were eclipses happening in Gemini and Sagittarius around and opposite my natal sun. We had Jupiter moving through my fifth house into my sixth house. So there was just a lot going on for me at this time. And at this time, Pluto was actually getting pretty close to Uranus, which is the first of that stack of planets that I have in my first house. So things were starting to get dark and spooky. And let me tell you that things got dark and spooky almost to the day that Pluto moved into my first house. But it gets more intense as the story goes because Pluto transits that entire Capricorn lineup. I remember laying awake in my childhood bedroom and staring out the window. We didn't have AC, it was San Diego, the window was open, I was just staring out into the backyard, it had a big canyon, and I was listening to this album nonstop, night after night, and just wrestling with this idea of if I loved life, if I mean, I just felt so ambivalent about being alive. I don't think I've ever gotten any further than that towards, harm or anything like that, but I was feeling so deeply ambivalent about
Mm,
the
yeah.
idea of being alive. And I remember listening to songs like Silver Soul, Norway, used to be, and Walk in the Park, and just feeling the beauty of Victoria Legrand. I mean, just one of the most beautiful, dreamy, optimistic albums of all time. I still hear these songs and absolutely want to cry because listening to these songs on those dark nights actually made me feel like it was probably worth reinvesting in myself and my life and trying to fall back in love with life.
I went on a listening spree into Beach House and Teen Dream specifically, and it's so fascinating to me that I have no history on the West Coast other than traveling there a few times, but it feels like the West Coast. It
Mhm.
feels like healing. It feels like this energy of exhaustion, but also it's like in that exhaustion, it's almost like you're laying on the beach and it's sunset, and this is hitting me right in the soul. And I find it so fascinating that the north nodes are aligned with this album
Dude,
too, and Mars is aligned with this album and you. This is crazy how much there is to unpack here, especially all of that stuff in the first house.
I think what's so impactful for me is, like, seeing the Sun, Venus conjunct my chart ruler Saturn opposing my chart ruler Saturn opposes a lot of my chart over there in Leo, and we've got the Sun and Venus conjunct that Saturn, lightening it, brightening it, adding light into the Saturnian melancholy, and opposing the Mars return of this album, which in my life, because I have a benefic enclosure by degree there with my Mars honestly has saved my life, and I mean, that's exactly what this chart is saying right here, isn't it?
I think a Mars in a synastry chart, Mars over Mars is like the pack full of just energy. Obviously, in a fire sign like Leo, it's gonna be just impact. Impact in the best way possible is how I would see that.
Absolutely. It felt like such a kick in the ass with this album. It was a slow process of falling back in love with life. Anyone who's ever felt ambivalent about their life or melancholy or has a heavy Saturn can understand. But the sun and Mars together, right? Historically, throughout many hundreds of years of astrological practice, the sun has widely been considered to be the antidote for Saturnian melancholy because you're shining light into those dark, heavy places that Saturn rules, and that is why Saturn is in detriment in Leo. So the idea that the Sun and Mars for the release of this album were together, bringing me this fire, bringing me this kick in the ass, even though we have this heavy Saturnian influence of the album. Saturn's also up there in Libra squaring my moon and putting some pressure on my moon, saying, like, get your shit together and show up in new ways that you've never shown up before. But the synastry of this album with me, if not evidenced anecdotally by the fact that I credit it with saving my life, is certainly evidenced astrologically by the synastry that I have in this chart.
Yes. And just realizing that's all in the 8th house too, of karma, the give and take of life, and it's just like, well, here you go, especially with that Saturn right at the top of your sky.
It was definitely one of the heavier times of my life, and I think this album really spoke to that. And I wasn't listening to this album when it came out. This album found me years later, exactly when I needed it,
Wow.
and spoke into those deepest little parts of me.
You've said this before on one of your shows, but it's kinda like art finds you when it needs to be found by you, and I just think it's so beautiful that you have all of these really transformational planets in your first house that are just doing that inner work of bringing you out as a different person.
let me share Liz's beautiful birth chart. You will see that Liz and I have some fabulous synastry. Liz is an 8-degree Scorpio rising, and I feel like we're both really bringing the scorpionic energy to this spooky Astro Weirdos
Absolutely.
tonight. Usually when we see each other, I'm like, I have no makeup on, and we're both kind of frazzled midweek working vibes. And then we both signed on tonight, and I was like, we just both look like Scorpio
Yes.
fabulous loves. So Liz, why don't you set us up? Why don't you tell us what was going on and set the scene for us?
It was the winter of 2021, so around February, and I was just getting out of a 7-year relationship,
Oh my God.
one that was long distance and kind of very separate for a long time, and it was just one of those things that I obviously saw coming, but nevertheless, a dark time because it was something I was basically putting energy into every day, and then all of a sudden it was kind of absent. So it's March or February 2021, and I fell almost out of all of my current interests and tastes and everything. I really got into Radiohead, and in particular, the albums Kid A and The Bends. And there was something so nostalgic about it and something so aesthetically somatic with the springtime just kind of awakening. I live in New England. The winter to spring is this really interesting in between time. I always say Pisces is one of my favorite seasons because it's just you can feel everything coming alive and it feels like the most magical time. So I was coming alive and it felt like I was being reborn into this new identity. This was a time that I was just in my car listening to Radiohead everywhere I went. If anyone knows Radiohead, you know that's I guess a pretty dark like take, especially if you're gonna go like deep into a specific album. It was such an imprint in my timeline, and I'm just fascinated to look at this chart.
You know, when I look at charts like this, I go through a number of layers. As an astrologer, I go through retrogrades in my head, I go through eclipses in my head, I go through some of the bigger periods and transits. And your fourth house is so active at this time. And the fourth house is one of those mysterious places that people often think, oh, it's home, it's living situation, it's parents. It's definitely all of those things. But it's also just the roots of the tree of Liz. So when you're talking about really going back into your roots, collecting the Radiohead, listening to all the Radiohead, pruning those roots, and becoming something kind of new and having a personal springtime, I think that's really beautiful. But your Aquarius is so activated. I mean, we had obviously Saturn coming through Aquarius earlier, just a couple months before this, we had the great conjunction at 0 Aquarius on December 21st, 2020. Jupiter is in there. At this time, we're having a Mercury retrograde in there. And then later in this year, when Venus comes back around to Capricorn, there's a Venus retrograde in Capricorn. So there's just this very Saturnian situation for you. And you're also at this point 25 going into year 26 on your birthday, which means that you were in a Jupiter perfected year. Jupiter is in your fourth house. And then you moved into a third house perfected year ruled by Saturn. Saturn is also in your fourth house. So there's just so
Wow.
much activation. So I wonder if anything that you were going through at the time, was it related to any childhood patterning, some of that icy stuff that we would typically expect to see?
Yeah, absolutely. I was actually living in a space that it felt like it was coming to an end, and this was connected to my family, this place was. It really truly felt like I was breaking out of my home, and actually from this point forward, I decided to move to a different state, which in New England, the state that I was moving to was not that far away, but it was still new to me because I'd never been out of the state that I grew up in. So this was kind of the turning point of when I decided to leave home. So I don't know if
Mm,
that's like telling, but another thing I will say about Jupiter's influence at this time is it really felt like Jupiter was absent in this experience in terms of the benefic element of Jupiter. It was all like the dark side of Jupiter, and then it turned into the benefic side of Jupiter really quickly in the spring. I met somebody during the springtime and it changed my life. And I felt like it was all very much connected to moving, to expanding my mindset of being like, I'm going to leave, I'm going to find something new. And then the moment I do that, I find the love of my life. It felt like it was all interwoven, interconnected, even though I couldn't see it at the time.
I can see how that would be true because in December of 2020, we had Saturn and Jupiter together. Now, even if Saturn is dignified, it's still Saturn. It's still weighing down that Jupiter and adding weight and adding gravity to it. So, as Jupiter moved away from that Saturn in Aquarius, Jupiter is not the happiest in Saturn signs, but definitely better off in Aquarius than in Capricorn. So, I'm sure it felt easier. And later that year, there were eclipses happening in Taurus in your seventh house. There were also eclipses happening right around your natal Venus, pretty much by degree. There was one at 19 Gemini in the summer of that year. And then in the fall, we had Taurus and we had a couple in Sagittarius that year as well. So your Jupiter definitely activated. And I would expect from a seventh house eclipse and an eclipse conjunct your Venus that you met the love of your life. That's so
That
sweet.
yeah, that is so crazy. I cannot believe that because it was literally right around that time frame. Astrology
So
is too
good.
good.
So we are going to look at Kid A. I'm going to do the astrologer thing and I'm going to tell you what I'm seeing in this chart. How about that? And then you can tell me how that relates to what you were going through at the time. But I can definitely see that even though you were listening to this album in 2021 and the album was released in 2000 and you were born in 1995, the Uranus position of this album's release is directly conjunct your IC. So all of that IC activation that we saw going on in 2021 is happening again right here in this 2000 release date with Uranus on your IC. So right away, I'm expecting to hear from you what we've already heard, which is that this was deeply related to childhood patterning, to family home, maybe ancestral connections, maybe the roots of the tree of Liz and like the depth of you and those deeper, more subterranean parts of you.
I can't even say it better, but I will say the nostalgic theme of it, it's like being born in the '90s and especially in 1995, all I remember in my growth as a young child is just hearing Creep and hearing Aerosmith and hearing all the things on the radio that are just so ingrained in me, Bush and all those bands, and it really did tie me back in to what I love about rock music because that was a huge thing for me growing up, listening to Queen on my little Walkman. I would listen to old rock, and like this really did tie me back into my interest in that because at the time I just went through college where I was hearing mainstream all the time and I wasn't connected. And it just connected me back into what I love.
Oh my God, we can totally see that here in this chart. I mean, even I think that the moon, Pluto, Chiron conjunct your Jupiter, and you talk about how your Jupiter wasn't totally present in the benefic way. I mean, who knows if art can bring that out? I'm sure some people would say that it can, and quite possibly it was doing that for you.
Mhm.
But Pluto basically conjunct your Jupiter and then the moon there with Chiron, like that's a pretty powerful combo. I'm also struck by the fact that Venus on this album's release date is directly conjunct your ascendant within 1 degree, which I think is really beautiful for a piece of art. You know, we
Yes.
want Venus to be pretty active.
It's really interesting that you're saying that because I'm looking at all of this now and I remember initially wanting to understand the Venus placement of this album and Uranus in particular, because I felt like at the time, and this is me in hindsight saying this because I at the time didn't know that this was Radiohead's first like really crazy album using way more electronics than they were using and synthesizers and things like that. I grew up really interested in music production, and so it's interesting that the Uranus placement is tying me back to, like, my original love of that, and then Venus connecting to the ascendant. It's really all aligning for me now seeing this.
Also, the descendant of this album is conjunct your Neptune Uranus situation, and it's like a descendant south node. So that is also really saying breakup, breakup.
Yeah.
And your Cancer stuff already nostalgic, but to have this breakup activated in these unexpected ways, but then particularly that fourth house. I think actually when you think back about that time period in 2021, that time period tells you something really valuable about your fourth house that you can carry with you into future fourth house activations and perfection years and transits. You
Yeah.
know now that your fourth house is not just parents, it's not just your home, it was your ancestral family home. It was your childhood home. It was this process of the springtime of the project of Liz. That's super valuable information.
Yeah, I have a whole new kind of viewpoint on the fourth house meaning for me, and maybe other people can relate, but it's kind of letting go. I mean, I had heavy planets in there, but it felt like it was like a letting go of who I was and then a reintroducing of who I was through the music. So it was like art forms were bringing me back to the things that I was interested in before this whole relationship took place. It was like going back
Wow.
to the roots.
Oh, that's so beautiful. I also wanted to share with you guys a little bit about my postpartum experience because I think this was another time period where art made a huge difference in how I was feeling and how I was able to show up in my own life. We're looking at some transits from early 2024, and this is really the throes of a really dark postpartum period for me. So, my son was born in November of 2023. There was actually a Mars Cazimi in Scorpio conjunct my Pluto MC, which is so sweet. That's my little screamer. He's an intense little boy, but he's a Libra rising with Venus in the first. So he makes up for it
Oh,
with
so
sweetness.
sweet.
He's very much the Sour Patch Kids that are sweet and sour. Like that's my son. So this was a really difficult time when I had my son. I had not ever really considered being a parent before, and I hadn't spent a lifetime imagining it or daydreaming about it. I really had no idea what was going to happen to me, and I had read a lot of books, but that doesn't really prepare you for the ways that your body and brain change when you have a baby. And my partner and I, we live in San Antonio. We don't have any family or friends really living in San Antonio. So we were totally on our own. I had gotten laid off from my job while pregnant as well. So we
My
also had
gosh.
gone from, yeah, being two income, no kids to having one income, having a new kid. And honestly, I think the most significant thing that was happening to me was that I was just changing dramatically. And honestly, one of the best books I'll just recommend out there to anyone who's had a baby about this is Matrescence by Lucy Jones. She talks so much. And when I found that book, I was so validated because she talks about the ways that our brains and bodies change permanently when we become mothers. The idea of a bounce back, we are debunking that by the day with science over what happens to women's brains and bodies. But this was just a disorienting time for me because I am a Gemini Sun Mercury. I am so used to having access to my thoughts. And, I do have a Cancer moon, but I was born the day of a Gemini new moon. I was born just a couple hours after the Gemini new moon. So that moon, I don't always feel connected to in a Cancerian way. Sometimes it is that I think in my life I've lived more in that Gemini new moon way. And during this process, I really felt no access to my thoughts whatsoever. I had extreme brain fog, and I've always considered most of my value to come from the combination of my Saturnian accomplishments and my mercurial intellect. And it was literally a time where both of those things were stripped away from me. I had no access to my brain. I would think of a word and then just I would feel the shape of a word. It's so hard to explain, but moms out there know what I'm talking about. Or if anyone has had long COVID, you know what I'm talking about, or traumatic brain injury. You reach for a word and it's just not there. It's like the shape of the word is there. You know that
Mm,
there's something there and you cannot access the word that is there. And it was demoralizing. And,
mm.
I've experienced depression at other times in my life. We've talked about that on this very program. It didn't feel like that, and I didn't realize that that's what was happening to me because it feels so different from regular depression, and there was nobody around me to say to me, "Hey, you're low key wasting away. Like, you haven't left the house, you haven't gone to the gym, you're not taking care of yourself, you're not taking your supplements." My
Mm.
partner and I were just doing our best to take care of our babies, and how did I compensate? Well, I thought to myself, I should probably get into an artist who has a huge back catalog that I could spend months and months and months going into. You already know who I chose. You guys aren't gonna wanna hear it. You guys aren't gonna wanna hear it.
You're not ready for this, guys.
But it was good old Taylor Swift, you guys. And that time period of that postpartum situation really actually coincided with the buildup for her album release for Tortured Poets Anthology. And if you can believe it, I had made it to my 34th year on Earth, never having heard most of Taylor Swift's famous songs. Like I had never heard Blank Space. I had never heard any of these songs.
Wow.
Yeah, it was crazy, and when I first got into it, I started listening to folklore, so we're gonna look at that in a minute, but it was all kinda going down right around the Tortured Poets Anthology, which I think is interesting. Now, this is basically a transits chart for me, right? Because
Mhm.
this stuff was going on for me
A month prior.
A month prior. Yeah. So all
Yeah.
this stuff, but you can see how active now the transits have really moved into my fourth house and my IC. So this was completely a repatterning of childhood stuff for me and stuff about mothering, which you can definitely see in the Saturn third house transit that I was living through at the time and the restrictions around my daily stuff. But I think this chart has some very fascinating synastry with
Mhm.
me. The anthology itself came out at 2 a.m. So that's why we put that one up there. But I actually want to take a look at the album that was really getting to me at that time. That actually made me feel like I had a friend that was walking this path with me. However sad that may sound, that's what we're doing here is looking into the art that spoke to us in that way. Again, we have an album that came out in 2020, but I was discovering and listening to this album and sort of time traveling in 2024. Looking at the chart of this album, we see some really important ways that it is speaking to me from another time. I love that Venus is there giving some love to my son, Mercury. The sun for this
Mhm.
album release is in Leo. We've got a Cancer Mercury, and then, of course, the absolutely tortured Capricorn situation that
Yeah.
wrecked most people. It coincided with the global pandemic, but for me, the pandemic time, it was like my Saturn was happy during that time, so I was happy.
Pulling up both of these charts, I'm noticing how naturally and not maybe by specific degree, but a lot of this stuff during this time was squaring almost all of your planets being right there in the third and fourth and maybe even second house during that in particular time. And I just wonder how it's like, is it those connections with you feeling kind of your mercurial senses feeling out of touch? I can see how that's really prevalent during that March 2024 time. And then this album, not far after, it's like almost getting a little better. It's everything's coming closer to maybe your big line of planets in the eighth, seventh, sixth house during that folklore album. To me, it seems more supportive because it's like everything's coming out of this awkward area for you where everything feels a little bit inaccessible. Not that it actually is, but it feels that way just looking at it.
Well, that's so brilliant, and this is why we absolutely need other people to look at our charts because before that album came out, we were in the Tortured Poets Anthology album lead-up cycle, and I never participated in one of those because again, I'm not a Swiftie, or at that time, I
Yeah.
wasn't a Swiftie. Let's be more honest. At the time, I was not a Swiftie. I was actually surprised I had never heard her music. I didn't know she had good songwriting ability, like, I didn't know that she collaborated with the people that she collaborated with who are songwriters that I admire. And so I was listening to this album, Folklore. Of course, this is like her most songwriting forward album. And I was in the heart of postpartum depression. So this is so beautiful for me to look at it. It's like truly makes me emotional because the sun in Leo was saying, "No, babe, there is light in the world. Don't forget." And this Venus moving between my Mercury and my sun was saying like, "No, no, there's sweetness, there's goodness in the world." But it was
Mhm.
really it was almost anesthetizing because what was happening to me is that I was having horrible sundowners at night. Like that's a very common thing with mothers. The sun goes down and you start to get really anxious and nervous because you know you're not going to sleep. And our kid was not
Mhm.
sleeping. He had all kinds of stuff going on. It was very sad and anxiety inducing. And I would listen to these albums and listen to this lyrics, and it was like this sunshine coming in the window for me at night. And I was also watching horrible sports podcasts. Like I was watching Barstool Sports live stream 24-hour streams, being like, my friends at Barstool, like
Yeah.
but so to your point that you just made so eloquently, because when this album did come out, Tortured Poets, right around then, just a couple
Mhm.
months had passed, but I was ready to do something differently. And when we look at this album, there are more squares. The stuff in Aries is squaring my ascendant and my moon, my first and seventh houses. And the
Mhm.
stuff in Taurus is forming a fixed grand cross with all of my fixed stuff. So
Mhm.
this is really profound connection you're making for me, Liz, because this album actually pushed me out of depression. Like that other
Yeah.
album made me feel okay, like feel really good, right? And
Yeah.
it spoke to me. But this one actually said, you need to go. I remember getting in my Jeep and like driving with the top down and feeling joy for the first time in months. I remember calling my sister and saying, hey, I actually need help. I need to come visit you in New York for 8 weeks because I am going crazy. I booked a ticket to Norwalk. Like this the way that a square works, it provoked me. It goaded me and it
Yeah.
fully was like, get out of here. Stop doing this.
And all of that energy is rising. It feels like it's like sloping up towards all of
Hmm.
your really active planets. So that's exactly what it feels like to me as you're explaining.
God, that's so beautiful. I never even saw that or thought of that, but that's so true. It was like I was just fully anesthetizing with the back catalog of Taylor Swift. And when the new album came out, I was like, I want to get out of my house. I'm going to go do this. I'm going to go do that. And it just completely changed my life. I mean, I make the
Yeah.
joke that Taylor Swift was my best friend at that time, but that is truly what it felt like. It was a very weird, lonely time, and no one on earth was more surprised than I was to know that I was a Swiftie after that. Fully, went to the Eras tour. I'll put a picture of the costume that I made. I mean, but even the costume I made, you can see where my postpartum situation was because I hand glued tens of thousands of rhinestones to a bodysuit,
Oh my
sewed
gosh.
hundreds of thousands of beads on there. It's giving that scene from Parks and Rec where Ben is like, "Would a depressed man make this?" Like, that's me in the bodysuit.
Yep, yep. Oh my god. And I will say, like, listening to these albums, I wanted to hear some of the songs that Alexandra wanted me to hear for this, and I was impressed. I mean, I was a Taylor Swift fan back in the day when she was country. I didn't know how she was these days, but hearing this folklore album and Tortured Poets, she's like same level as Lana Del Rey to me. I was saying to Alexandra, it feels like she's like the best friend who knows about this romantic affair that's taking place, and she's here for you to let it all out. And that's just what I feel like listening. I think it was more like Tortured Poets, but Folklore was just so beautifully eloquent. I was really impressed with her writing, and then knowing that she wrote that completely is like
I know. I
crazy.
texted a friend, and at the time, I remember literally texting my friend and going, "Did you know that during COVID, Taylor Swift, Aaron Dessner from The National, and Justin Vernon from Bon Iver all got together and rented a house and they made an album?" And he was like, "Yes, everybody knew that that happened. Did you miss that that happened in 2020?" I was like, "Yeah, I hated Taylor Swift and I guess I just removed that from my brain." But like
Oh
I was
my
like, "Did you
gosh.
know that she collaborated with Phoebe Bridgers?" And they're like, "Yes." It was just like everybody knew this but me. I just didn't know she was a good songwriter. It was truly
Yeah.
shocking to me to discover. I mean, obviously she has pop music and she has all kinds of range. She does country stuff, whatever. But it was shocking to me. And it was a really fun and beautiful thing to discover. Like I said, I started that time period by thinking I should just get into some artist that has a huge back catalog. And I downloaded 10 different artist albums. I think I had the Queens of the Stone Age. I was like, maybe it's finally time to like invest in the Strokes.
Right.
All right. I downloaded some Strokes albums. Like I had all these artists that I was like, let's really get into, including
Mhm.
some classic artists. Maybe I should finally, go through the Rolling Stones back catalog, whatever it is.
Yeah.
No, Taylor Swift found me exactly when I needed her. That folklore sun was shining right into my eighth house, being like, stay
Yep.
alive. And then there was a exciting album cycle. And then I got to go to the Eras tour and it truly spurred me out with those squares. You're so right.
I notice her Cancer moon in there, and you and I
Oh
share
my
a Cancer
God.
moon. And she's nurturing in her music. She just tells you that she gets it and she's experienced all the things that are hard that you're going through right now. That's what I just feel really heavily in her music. So this is fascinating to look at.
And on that tortured poet's note, we are going to wrap up our spooky nocturnal exploration of some of the darker parts of our lives, candidly, and some of the ways that the art that we love does or doesn't have synastry or shows up with us. I hope you guys really enjoyed digging into these charts and let us know in the comments what you saw because we only really kind of covered conjunctions and a couple things that we were immediately seeing, but there is so much interesting here. And if you do some exploration of your own and you look at some of your own charts, definitely let Liz and I know in the comments. And Liz, you are such a talented astrologer, herbalist, creative. You make music, you teach everybody how to podcast. Liz is the visionary brain behind my podcast, but also Whitney Cran's House of Good Spirit and Sarah Posh, Cozy with the Cosmos. Like Liz is the creative mastermind. So tell everybody how they can find you if they need your
Yeah.
expert help.
Yeah, definitely. So my most active channel would be at Essence Presents underscore on YouTube. That is my YouTube channel where I teach about content production and all of that. I just launched a wait list for a group consulting slash interactive course program to help you DIY your own podcast. So if you're interested in learning how to do basically what I do, that is going to be there for you in the near future. And then as a true Astro Weirdo, I also sell astrology birthday cards on Etsy.
I got one this year. I keep it
Yeah.
over here.
So that will be linked also below.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining me on Astro Weirdos. You guys, this has been so fun. Thank you to Astrotheoros. Make sure you use the code 9lives. If you want to get a month free, check out Astrotheoros. Use it to animate your charts. All right. Thank you so much for being here, Liz.
Thank you so much, Alexandra, for having me. I love being on this side of the screen every once in a while.